The Seattle SuperSonics might actually be coming back for real this time. Glenn, are you ready?
Gee, I don't know. I've only had 17 years to prepare. Welcome to the premiere episode of Rain City Rebound, the podcast. I'm Glenn Dreyfus. Zane Begg, how did we get here as a Seattle basketball community?
Well, we come over from the Seattle hockey community, where you and I both cover the Seattle Kraken for their site, Davy Jones's Locker Room. And that is going to become relevant. The Seattle Kraken, this is not the last time you're going to hear about them in this podcast because they're very important. And the people who own the Kraken are very important to what seems like the inevitable return, truly inevitable return of the Seattle SuperSonics.
The prodigal team.
The prodigal team. So we're a couple of hockey journalists, and we're now a couple of basketball journalists. We're both members of the Pro Hockey Writers Association, and we're credentialed with the Kraken. So we're not just moonlighting. We have some journalistic chops, and we are really excited to bring to you, the listeners or viewers, the news and the story and the journey of the Seattle SuperSonics and what looks to be their actual return after 18 years, which has been the biggest scar and the saddest story in Seattle sports history, which is littered with sad stories. But this one really towers above them all.
So, Zane, do you start us back in 2008 when Sonics 1.0 left town?
Yeah, or we can even start a little bit earlier than that. I mean, the Sonics, they won the city's first championship in 1979. Is that right?
Right.
And they also went to the NBA Finals in 96 during the Gary Payton, Sean Kemp heyday. And the Seattle just loved this team. And even after that heyday left and you had this other era, Seattle, they filled the stadium. They loved the Sonics. And then for reasons that if you're really interested in, there's a documentary on YouTube called Sonics Gate. But some businessmen from Oklahoma City bought the team under what may have been semi-false pretenses, saying that they were planning to keep the team in Seattle when their intention was to move the team. And so they ended up moving to Oklahoma City and leaving Seattle without a team because it was ultimately about an arena and trying to get a new arena and who was going to pay for the arena. And the arena doesn't have enough luxury boxes. And it was all about a place to play and who was going to pay the money to pay to build a place or renovate a place for them to play, because where they were at Key Arena was no longer adequate, I guess, for those people.
The Oklahoma City people, who I refer to as the carpetbaggers, there was no somewhat in the false pretenses. They were always planning to move the team to Oklahoma City. They did nothing to try to find a suitable arena in Seattle. They did nothing to try to prevent the passage of the initiative that required value for taxpayer investment in a new arena, which is something as a community asset makes sense, but they didn't fight it because they didn't want a new arena. So they got what they wanted, was a team in Oklahoma City. And the basketball fans of this city have been left with a lot of false starts and false hope and false promises. And we hope that all is coming to an end.
Yeah, we thought, so I've lived in Seattle almost my entire adult life. I've moved to Seattle during the late 1900s. And so I saw the move happen and then the tease. And when they moved, it was like, well, we'll have the NBA back in just a couple of years. And then in 2013, there was a report that Seattle investor Chris Hansen, not the To Catch a Predator guy, but just a hedge fund owner, he had bought the Sacramento Kings, and the report was that it wasn't that the Kings might move to Seattle. It was the Sacramento Kings are moving to Seattle to become the Seattle SuperSonics. It was reported as a done deal, and I don't know if you've noticed, but the Sacramento Kings have still been in Sacramento over the last 12 years, and Seattle still doesn't have an NBA team. Then Chris Hansen, there was going to be, he had an arena solution, and then if that arena solution passes, then they'll get an expansion team, and then there was all the city council stuff, and then the sacred strip of Occidental Avenue, just south of the stadium, where the Mariners and Seahawks play, and it was all this nonsense, and then it didn't happen, and now all of that is about an arena. It has always been about arena, and all of the extraordinary amounts of nonsense that goes into building an arena suitable for the NBA.
The Kings, just as a side oddity, Seattle's the only place they didn't move. They started life in Rochester, New York. Then they spent time in Cincinnati. They moved to Kansas City, where they had to change their name because they had been the Royals, and Kansas City already had a baseball team with that name. So they became the Kings. They tried splitting some of their games off to Omaha, Nebraska. And when it didn't work in Kansas City or Omaha, then they moved to the capital of California. So they've moved almost everywhere. The one place they didn't go, because they ended up having a mayor who was a former NBA player, was to Seattle. And I'm not entirely sad about that, because in a way it would have felt icky to take some other city's team the way some other city took our team.
Especially the way Sacramento loves the Kings as well. You know, it's not like, and not to besmirch the NBA fans in Atlanta, but for example, I think if the Hawks were to move, I think that's a lot less of a civic tragedy than if the Sacramento Kings are, they just have just great fans.
Well, notwithstanding the A's and their mercurial ways, the Sacramento Kings are that city's and that region of California's only professional team. So it would be quite a loss to the community and the sports fans of that community if they had left.
Well, thankfully, nobody's going to be losing their teams, and it seems like we're going to be gaining a team out of whole cloth through the expansion process. And so when you talk to Sonics fans who have heard over the last 2 decades, you know, they're coming back. Well, why is this different? And there are several things that this is a very real thing in a way that did not exist prior.
All right, let's talk about the prospective Sonics ownership group, and that does go back to the hockey team, because although the NHL Kraken are a wonderful addition to the city's sports landscape in their own right, they were also the canary in the coal mine for the return of NBA basketball. Canaries, if you don't know, at one time were used to test for carbon monoxide and other gases in underground mines. So the canaries were guinea pigs. Anyway, would Seattle sports support a winter team even if it wasn't the one they were most hoping for? Could the arena support the demands of a pro sports franchise? Would the ownership group prove stable and competent? Could a business operation be built from the ground up? Fortunately for Kraken fans and for Sonics fans, we can now determine the answers are yes, 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 and yes. Everything about the Kraken ownership group is rock solid, and in the mantra of Climate Pledge Arena, appears sustainable. That's why the owners of the Kraken, who also own the arena, are the clear front runners to also be the owners of Sonics 2.0. And I'll pose one more question and then answer it. Are there legitimate fan gripes over way the ownership has run its hockey team? Sure there are. Name me a franchise where fans don't question the owners. But it's actually irrelevant in this case because that stuff is more down in the weeds. This ownership group, led by Samantha Holloway and CEO Todd Leiweke, have proven they can get a venue built and get a franchise up and running during a pandemic, no less. These are the kinds of people that other NBA owners want to welcome into their circle. In a couple of minutes, I'll detail some of the key members of that ownership group, but first, Zane, your thoughts.
Yeah, and the Jeff Baker, formerly the Seattle Times, now who is employed by the Seattle Kraken, he wrote a book about it is ostensibly about the Kraken coming to be, but really a big chunk of it is the construction of an arena solution. And one of the things that was mentioned is how the people who constructed Climate Pledge Arena and Tim Leiweke, the brother of Kraken CEO Todd Leiweke, has such a strong relationship with the NBA. And Todd Leiweke also has former leadership positions with the NBA. Previously, when it looked like the prospective owner was going to be Chris Hansen had a very poor relationship with the NBA. Jeff wrote in his book that he had a meeting with the NBA commissioner and it did not go well. And it just, he wasn't one of the beloveds the way that the Leiwekes are. And that matters because David Stern, I don't think David Stern or Adam Silver was ever going to give an NBA team to Seattle if Chris Hansen was the owner. And that is something that we don't have to worry about because Samantha Holloway, whose father, David Bonderman, was a minority owner of the Boston Celtics until very recently. And so they already have ownership relationship with the NBA. This is not somebody they have to convince to say, hey, look at us, we can do this. The NBA already knows and likes the ownership group, which is a huge obstacle to overcome.
By the way, if they choose not to call the team Sonics, I hope they call it the Beloveds. You're one of the Beloveds.
So the National Hockey, or not the National Hockey League, but the Professional Hockey League team in Portland 100 years ago when they were battling Seattle for the Stanley Cup, they were the Portland Rosebuds.
Yes.
So, you have the Rosebuds and you have the Beloveds. We could just have the Pacific Northwest of love.
Here's a more detailed look, Zane, at the key players in this Kraken and potentially Sonics ownership group. And we'll start with someone you already referenced, Samantha Holloway, who's daughter of the original team founder, David Bonderman. She's the face of ownership, the club's executive chair, and outside of sports, she's also run successful startups in the tech sector. There is Todd Leiweke. He's a minority owner, also the CEO of the Kraken, and importantly, has Seattle roots as well beyond that. He's formerly a Seahawks executive, and he's a real player. He's a former chief operating officer, and I mean player not in the on the field sense, but I mean in the boardroom sense. He's the chief operating officer of the entire NFL. Jerry Bruckheimer is another Kraken owner. He's a prominent film producer. Think Top Gun and Pirates of the Caribbean. Adrian Hanauer, who soccer fans in this town will know is the majority owner of the Seattle Sounders. Andy Jassy, who's CEO of a little startup you may have heard of called Amazon. Chris Ackerley, yeah, You know Amazon. Yeah.
I'll
All
have to
right. Well,
Google
we'll
that one.
talk later, Zane.
Yeah.
Chris Ackerley, there's a name you might recognize because he's the son, one of the sons of the former SuperSonics owner. Barry Ackerley owned the Sonics for 18 years. Now, along with brother Ted, Chris Ackerley runs Ackerley Partners LLC. They invest in Seattle tech startups, among other things. You mentioned Tim Lywicki, Todd's brother. Tim is the one who actually got on the phone with Todd one day and said, "Hey, let's build an arena in Seattle." And that's what convinced Todd to leave his COO job with the NFL to go work on Climate Pledge Arena and with the Kraken. Tim is a mover and shaker in his own right, CEO of Oakview Group, one of the world's leading development and investment companies when it comes to sports and live entertainment. And then the Kraken have a couple of lesser owners in terms of their financial investment, but well known nevertheless. One is Beast Mode of the Seahawks, Marshawn Lynch, and then there's the rapper Macklemore. So this is an interesting collection of owners. It also reminds me, Zane, that when the team was owned by Starbucks chairman Howard Schultz, there were actually like 58 different owners. So if the names I mentioned sound like a lot of people, it's not. You can have an unwieldy number of owners. The Kraken have a lot of very influential and Seattle-tied business interests. It's an eclectic group to be sure, but it's really a well-grounded one.
And I think also one of the things that's important is having money, which the amount of money that is necessary now for an expansion fee, maybe $5, $6, $7 billion. And so there aren't that many people in this world that can afford that kind of price. And one of the obstacles that could present itself is, well, coming up with that kind of money. But having powerful partners like Amazon and Jerry Bruckheimer and the, we know that they do have the money and they have the funding, or they're likely to have the money and the funding. And this isn't some ownership group. It's like, well, they have a hockey team, but this is a lot. And like, why are they going to come up with the money for this stuff? We don't have to worry about that. They're not small players trying to play in a big pond.
Let's also talk, Zane, about how the city itself, how Seattle, how Puget Sound, the region, how it is different and in a better place to welcome back the Sonics than it was in 2008.
Yeah, if you have lived in Seattle this entire time, it is very obvious that the city has changed a lot in that time. And I think that one of the things that I hear from people who are cynical about the return of the Sonics is that the NBA is just using Seattle as leverage for other cities to build arenas for them, and that Seattle won't get an arena. Similar, like what appeared to have maybe have happened in Sacramento, is that the threat of the Kings moving ended up them getting an arena here. And so one of the refrains that I hear often is that the NBA will never actually return to Seattle. And I want to put forth the case here because there's a really strong financial incentive. And no matter how cynical you are, follow the money is going to, I mean, that is the most powerful incentive when it comes to very large corporations like the NBA. So Seattle is a very enticing market for the NBA. It is the 10th largest metro area in gross domestic product, or GDP, which is $560 billion in 23. And it's the fastest growing GDP of any major metro area. It's fourth in median household income. It's second highest GDP per capita. And that's just the people, the fans who would be buying tickets and watching on TV. But then also you have the corporate sponsorship base, which is just enormous here. So the little company you were mentioning, Amazon, though they were a little company relatively, in 2009, their revenue was $24.5 billion, which, wow, that sounds like a lot. Last year was $638 billion. Microsoft, 58 billion in 2009, now 245 billion. So we're talking just, multiples and multiples growth. I mean, Amazon was just a fraction of what it is now. We have Amazon, we have Boeing, we have Microsoft, we have Starbucks, we have Costco, we have T-Mobile, and we have Nordstrom, right? We have all of these corporate large sponsors that didn't exist really, and certainly not to this degree, when the Sonics were trying to find, an arena solution and things were unstable. Also of note, 2008 was there was a financial crisis going on, and so it was hard to get people to invest money when we're having the worst economic conditions since the Great Depression. All of that stuff is behind us now. And now Seattle is just this crown jewel with this great economic opportunity. And there is no other metro area that is this rich for the NBA as a potential franchise. So, but the issue has been and has always been getting an arena. And so my question to you, Glenn, is Climate Pledge Arena actually suitable for the NBA?
The people who built it made damn sure it would be from the very start of construction. Just to go back a second to your point about all these big, well-off companies, you can build a Climate Pledge Arena, you can build all the luxury suites, but you also have to have companies and industries with the cash willing to invest in those luxury suites and buying up big blocks of tickets. So it goes hand in hand. So as you point out, Seattle is now in a corporate place to be able to support what the NBA requires financially. But as far as the actual structure goes, let's do a way overly simplified history of pro sports venues in this town. The city's original baseball team, the Pilots, played in a substandard facility, so they left. The replacement baseball team, the Mariners, threatened to leave, so taxpayers ponied up for a new stadium. The NFL Seahawks threatened to leave, so taxpayers built them a new stadium too. The Sonics threatened to move, and taxpayers said, enough. Key Arena at the time was considered one of the best places to watch an NBA game and was only 10 years into a renovation. But it didn't have the luxury amenities that bring in the big money that owners and that leagues want. So the Sonics owners at the time, those carpetbaggers from Oklahoma City, moved the team there. Now, the irony to me, Zame, is that an indoor arena for sporting events, for concerts and other events is much more of a community asset than a T-Mobile Park or a Lumen Field could ever hope to be. But Kraken CEO Todd Leiweke called it a 30-year problem. How to get a world-class facility built in a way that would entice pro expansion teams without public funding. And you know what? They did it. And to the question you originally asked, Climate Pledge Arena was built with the NBA in mind. The arena was privately built and built in a way with revenue sources that make leagues take notice. The NHL did. They awarded the expansion Kraken to Seattle in 2018. But along the way, the owners were thinking pro basketball too. They dedicated $50 million worth of infrastructure specifically to meet standards that they knew the NBA would require. In short, without Climate Pledge, the NBA would still, to this day, not be giving Seattle a second thought, or maybe even a first thought. And one more thing, basketball is already played there. The NBA's WNBA Seattle Storm have played there for a number of years. The Seattle University Redhawks play selected games there. College tournament games, both men's and women's, have been played there. Also, NBA exhibition games. So, Zame, all we need is for the Sonics to join the Kraken and the Storm and the PWHL expansion pro women's hockey team. And then we'll only have one other problem as sports fans, and that'll be figuring out sometime when we can leave Climate Pledge Arena.
Yeah, my dream purchase is not like a Lamborghini, or it's a condo on Queen Anne, so that I have a place that I can walk to Climate Pledge from home. So if anyone wants to donate that to the Rain City Rebound, we'll set up a PayPal. And so it is also, I really want to emphasize and really underscore the fact that this required no public funding, and requires no public funding to engage in any renovations. No renovations are necessary. Nothing needs to be done to the arena to make it ready for the Sonics to play there. And it didn't cost anything to in public funding to build it, and it will not cost anything in public funding going forward. And so, to those who are skeptical and cynical about that, this is not a cash grab from taxpayers. This has all been privately put up, which is kind of a miracle, I think, that this whole thing even happened. It's kind of an implausible solution. If you say, well, the only realistic way for an arena to get built is to have it happen the way it did, it just didn't seem like that would be a realistic path, honestly.
Yes, it is something close to a miracle. And these are smart business people, because although they had the good of Seattle in mind, these are not people who thought, well, let's build it, and sure, we'll lose hundreds of millions of dollars that we put into it. No, these are people who figured out a business plan that we will build a $1.15 billion facility, but in time, it will pencil out and we'll make money out of it. And I believe that they will.
A $1.15 billion facility that is owned by the city, by the way, and not owned by the Oakview Group. So it is the city of Seattle that owns the arena, even though it was a private investor that put all the money into it.
You also feel, Zane, very strongly that despite almost 2 decades of being without NBA basketball, the passion for the sport hasn't waned.
Oh, it definitely hasn't. The NBA may have left Seattle, but basketball certainly did not. And it is, if you just look around the city, there are tons of basketball leagues. People are playing all the time. It generates a disproportionate amount of NBA talent. You know, we've got a number 1 overall draft pick coming from Seattle. We've got that's Colin Baccaro. You've got Jay McDaniels. You've got Zach LaVine. Jamal Crawford, Isaiah Thomas. There are a lot of NBA players have come out of this area, even though we don't have an NBA team anymore for them to kids to grow up and say, hey, there's a a team here, I'm interested in basketball. It is, and the support for the Storm is really strong. When I go to these preseason games, these exhibition games that you mentioned, they're just filled with rabid Sonics fans. And it's the Clippers and Blazers who are playing, but everyone just wants just like this is the closest approximation to Sonics basketball. And when I talk to people about the Sonics, even now, there is so much passion and enthusiasm and pain, and in a way that doesn't really happen with hockey to the same extent. People are interested in hockey, but it's more like a novelty, and the magnitude is a lot lower. With the Sonics, it represents something that has been missing from the city, but the city never really gave up on basketball. And so we had the Save Our Sonics movement that was started by Brian Robinson, and it was a grassroots effort, and they lobbied City Hall, and they influenced local politics, and then you had Arena Solutions to try to get the Arena Solution built. And now we have Seattle NBA Fans, which is a coalition of, Seattle NBA fans who are ready to get the word out and to be the tailgate party when the Sonics do come back, and informing people and getting people excited. And these groups have been existing continuously in one form or another since even before the Sonics left, when it was clear that they might leave. And the enthusiasm has always been here. The passion has always been here and has been uninterrupted. And when the Sonics do come back, and I really fully believe that this is a when, not if, it is going to be unlike anything that we have ever seen in Seattle sports, because there's never been a story like this in Seattle sports, or really in pro sports.
And the reason we're talking about this now is because the league has finally hinted that there are reasons for optimism. So tell us, Zane, what the latest is on where the league stands on the Sonics return.
Well, we had been kind of teased, and initially Commissioner Adam Silver said, well, we want to make we have to wait until the collective bargaining agreement is signed, and then the media rights deal is signed. And then there was an issue about the Celtics are now for sale, and that's going to set the price for the expansion fee. So we want to see how much they sell for. And it just kind of kept getting pushed back and back and back. And even me, as someone who is an optimist about the Sonics, I started to lose a little bit of faith that this was not a priority for the NBA. The commissioner went from gradually, he's gone from we're not considering expansion, which was the case like 6-7 years ago. And then, someday we might look at expansion, and then more hints of expansion. And then the language got a little bit more specific, a little bit more concrete. And then he started mentioning Seattle. And then the other day, Adam Silver dropped this little thing with a specific timeline about expansion. Jolie, roll that clip.
We have a NBA board meeting in July in Las Vegas, and my sense is it will be on the agenda to discuss with full ownership now for the 30 teams to get directly the existing owners' views on potential expansion and how we would begin furthering the study of all the implications. And I've said before, there's an impact on dilution of talent. There's, of course, an economic impact in that presumably if we were to expand, let's say, an even number of teams, 2 teams, it means there's then a division of our media deals by 2 additional partners, et cetera. That's just math. That's something we have to look at as well. And then get a sense of the level of interest from certain markets. And look, I know there's tremendous interest in Seattle. I know there's tremendous interest in Las Vegas and several other cities as well that whether I've read about the interest or, have heard indirectly from others, just to be clear, we haven't begun any sort of process. So even to the extent cities have reached out, we've said thank you for your interest, but we're not ready to take meetings yet and have more in-depth discussions. But we will have that opportunity early this summer again to talk to all the different ownership groups in the NBA and get a sense. And I'll lastly say, expansion, I think over time makes sense. As to precise timing, I think we still need to work on that.
So what say you to the people who go, well, okay, that's Lucy with the football. I'm Charlie Brown as Seattle running up to kick it, and they're just going to pull it away again.
The commissioner has never spoken about expansion this way. He's never spoken about expansion with a specific timeline to say we are going to look at this, when the owners meet this July. We have all of the economic indicators that we discussed earlier. And also, if you didn't notice, which you probably did, is he brought up Seattle unsolicited. And he tends to do that, or has been doing that. This is not the first time he has mentioned Seattle unsolicited in the context of NBA expansion. And so this is really monumental news. And it may not seem like that from just like a little comment, but it means that the NBA is finally ready to do the thing that we were this was inevitable. They were eventually going to turn and look at expansion, but now it seems like we're here
to address the cynics, and they have right to be cynical. There was the sale of the Celtics, and that was going to be the last roadblock. And now there's another lower roadblock that Adam Silver and the league identified, which was and is local media rights. So let me take a moment to explain that. Sports Business Journal ran a story recently that what they call linear viewership, what we call watching on TV for local NBA broadcasts, dropped 9% this past regular season. Now, streaming was up 30%, and that's where the league and all leagues want to go, and that's where all of entertainment wants to go. But what has the league concerned in the meantime, according to industry insiders, is that cable and satellite TV continue to bleed subscribers. Roughly 2.7 million pay TV subscribers cut the cord just between September and March. So it isn't a basketball or even a sports viewing problem. It's a television watching problem. So the local TV situation for the NBA cut in line in front of expansion as a league topic. And here's Commissioner Silver talking on that topic.
That deal has just been presented to us, so we're still analyzing it. And my sense is once we've been through that process, that we'll turn to it a more serious way. I mean, the league office has continued to model what potential expansion could look like, over the last year or so. And again, that includes both understanding dilution from an economic standpoint. We now have a better understanding of that. Now that we have our national deals in place, and also from a player standpoint too. And I just add the last component, which also is giving me just a bit of pause, is that we'd like to have a better sense of where we're going with local media. Bill Koenig is here, our head of media. He made a fairly lengthy presentation to the board on that. It's well known that we've seen some significant declines there. Virtually 2/3 of our teams are now dealing with RSNs that recently experienced bankruptcies or have shut down. And so I think while we understand the national media landscape now, if to the extent we're looking at expansion domestically, I think we would really like to understand what that opportunity for local media is, because it's a pretty critical component of our team's economics.
And Zaim, I'll add to that. Bill Simmons of The Ringer believes there's an underreported story that the disconnect between Silver and maybe some of the other owners and James Dolan, the owner of the Knicks, that there's a real animosity there because Dolan not only owns the Knicks, he owns the Rangers and some other sports properties, but he also owns Madison Square Garden Cable and is deeply upset that the new TV contracts make more of the NBA games and more of the Knicks games national, meaning they won't appear on his lucrative cable system. So when Adam Silver talks about the local media rights issues, that's not a smokescreen to try to get in the way of Seattle expansion. It's a real issue he has to deal with.
Not only that, but also Bally's, which is under the Diamond Sports Group, which carries something like 12 different NBA broadcasts. They filed bankruptcy. They're $8.5 billion in debt. And they missed like a $450 million like interest payment. They're in real trouble. And if you don't have a way to broadcast your games, then that's a real issue for NBA teams. So they need to figure that out. And it is absolutely not a smokescreen when, half the league is in turmoil about how they're going to broadcast their games regionally. Then I think it makes sense for the commissioner to say, hold on, let's make sure we understand this. And we saw this on the Kraken side, I think it was just poor timing with when the cable cutters movement happened. But the Seattle Kraken, they were on Root Sports, a regional sports network, for their first 3 years of existence. And it was really hard to access Kraken games. It was expensive. It was just not easy. And viewership was not very high. And then when they went with a hybrid model of broadcasting over the air and streaming on Amazon, the viewership exploded, even though the team wasn't very good this year.
And down the road, not down the road in terms of time, but literally 3 hours away down I-5, the Portland Trailblazers did the same thing. They left Root Sports for over-the-air broadcasts as well. Now, the organization that was branded as Bally Sports and is now known as FanDuel Sports Network, the teams that were associated and had their games on regional sports networks of the Diamond Group, my understanding is they've agreed to 1-year deals for the 25-26 season with FanDuel. And then they will revisit after this year because there just wasn't the time to really make the switch. But that's just a short-term fix. What I'd like to discuss further is something you brought up, and I think it's a really key point that Adam Silver on multiple occasions has taken what I consider to be the unusual step of addressing Seattle fans specifically. When he talks about something gives him a bit of a pause, I have to chuckle because in Seattle, we've had 17 years of a bit of a pause. And we're not considering this a bit of a pause. It's like, come on, get off your tush and let's go. 17 years is so much longer than NBA fans ever thought they'd have to wait for a replacement Sonics team. So I think it's fair to say that what Sonics fans see as excuses, even if they're valid from the NBA's point of view, it pours salt into wounds that have never healed. So I'd like to play a clip now of the commissioner taking that unusual step of addressing Seattle fans directly.
to our many fans in Seattle, and I hear from them often. And the legacy of the Sonics is still very strong, and it's a fantastic basketball market. Is that we are very focused on it. The fact I think that I'm not being more sort of forthcoming publicly doesn't mean we're not studying it very intensively. We don't take those fans for granted. We're thankful that the interest has remained over all these years. And so I would just say the fact that we're not ready to make any public announcements with a specific timeline doesn't mean we don't care a lot about those fans and we aren't very focused on the potential for the NBA to return to Seattle.
And that's a pretty interesting thing, because Adam Silver is a very deliberate person. He does not speak cavalierly or off the cuff. Everything is calculated and meticulous, and to a fault, I think. But when he then speaks to the fans of Seattle, and he does so again unsolicited, that holds considerable weight, and more weight than maybe it might be from someone else who is less calculated a speaker. And so what that says to me is that the NBA is really interested in Seattle, and they can't just come out and say like, yeah, we've had this on a whiteboard for 4 years, and we're like, yep, Seattle's coming. But I do think that it is very likely that the NBA has and is considering Seattle as somewhat of a foregone conclusion. And I do want to be careful, because we have been burned by foregone conclusions in the past. And so nothing is 100%, especially with the transaction involving, $7+ billion. But, as we said before, it's different this time. There are a lot of things that are different. And I think that the commissioner is he's throwing us a bone, and he's giving the fans kind of a hint. It was like, hey, look, I wouldn't be talking about Seattle unless we were real serious about Seattle.
And to be fair to the man, Adam Silver, the commissioner, and why do we want to be fair to the commissioner? But we're going to do it anyway. Let's be fair to Adam Silver. Not all of this is in his control. He is the one who has to come to the microphone and speak, but he has to take marching orders from the owners. It's an odd thing about pro sports commissioners in that they have to look out for the good of the game, but in truth, they are working for the owners. So we don't know what's being said behind closed doors. And probably if Adam Silver had his way as an individual, he would have already started the expansion talks, but he has to take care of the people who write his paychecks.
Yeah, commissioner is not NBA dictator, right? Which is how, sometimes it seems. It's like, well, the commissioner is all-knowing, all-powerful, and he is not, in fact, all-powerful. He answers to the owners, and if the owners don't want the commissioner, then they gotta get a new commissioner.
All right, how about we close on a current events takeaway, Zane?
All right, well, you seem to have some thoughts about the NBA playoffs this year.
The 2025 NBA playoffs, as we record this, are headed to the conference championship round. And sure, I could talk about the 5 amazing comeback wins from 20 or more points down we've already seen in the first 2 rounds. Heck, the Knicks were down 20 points to the Celtics in back-to-back games and rallied to win. But I'm going to go a different direction. For me, based on this year's playoffs so far, we need a new word. Because the word we've been using for some of the games, blowout, fails miserably to describe some of the mismatches. The Cavaliers won Game 3 of their opening round series with the Heat by 37 points. And in Miami, they refer to that as the close game, because in the Game 4 clincher, Cleveland led 72-33 at halftime and won by 55 points. Meanwhile, Oklahoma City had a 51-point victory to open their sweep of the Memphis Grizzlies. Even a team that won its opening round series, the Denver Nuggets, managed to drop Game 3 to the LA Clippers by 34 points. Now, Denver gave OKC a hell of a scare in the second round, except for two things. Game 2, which they lost 149-106. Get this, the Thunder set an NBA playoff record for first half points with 87. And then in Game 7, during about a 20-minute stretch of game time between the first and third quarters, the Thunder outscored the Nuggets by 34 points. So if you're scoring at home, or even if you're by yourself, we've had 5 contests in the first 2 rounds that should have been declared no contest, with winning margins of 34, 37, 43, 51, and 55 points. So, blowout won't do. Detonation, mutilation, disfigurement, debasement, mangling. Zame, any of those grab you?
I like disfigurement. The first word that came to mind was annihilation, but I think your options are better. A dismemberment.
I agree, but boy, those games, the people who have bought ads for the fourth quarter of some of these games have to be crying all the way to their next board meeting.
You know, I wonder if the comebacks and the blowouts are kind of the two sides of the same coin, in that if you have higher volume 3-point shooting in the NBA, and 3-point shooting is inherently more volatile, then two things can happen. One is, if you're down by a lot, teams are better equipped to come back because there are better 3-point shooters in the NBA, much, much better than they were 10, 15, 20 years ago. And then the second is, if the team that's ahead, they're hitting their shots, well, what they're hitting their shots, they're not advancing the score by 2, they're advancing it by 3. And so then you start building these runaway scores. And I think, I mean, I haven't looked at the data, but that would be my guess as to why this is happening, is that the NBA is just, it's a lot more volatile, which leads to both more exciting games and also more boring games.
Well, I hope we were exciting and not boring, because now I think we're done.
I think so too. So thank you for listening to our inaugural episode. We will be covering not just the return of the Sonics, but other Seattle basketball events as well. And we would, first of all, want to thank our producer, Jolie Simons. And also, if you could do us a huge favor as we're getting started, like and subscribe, or, leave us 5-star review. It would really help us out. And that's all I've got, Glenn. And you know what, Glenn? See you on the rebound.